Okay, well, good evening, everyone. It is so good to be here with you all today. My name is Ashley Daniels, and I serve as the 2021-2022 Leading Edge Fellow, working with the wonderful organization Black Girls Vote. I am also a proud member of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, and I am also the chair for this incredible panel. It is with great pleasure that I warmly welcome everyone to this exciting roundtable discussion co-hosted by the National Conference of Black Political Scientists and Black Girls Vote for the 2022 annual meeting of NCOPS. The title of this session, Sister Speak, truly speaks for itself. This is a beautiful opportunity to bring together the collective brilliance of Black women as political science researchers and grassroots community leaders based in Baltimore, Maryland, in conversation about the needs, leaders, and futures of Black women in politics in American democracy, from each of their very diverse experiences and perspectives. There's the Senegalese proverb that says, if you speak to her who understands you. We hope that the spirit of those words come alive tonight as we create this sacred space in meaningful dialogue and powerful learning and understanding amongst each other. Our first speaker for the evening is Ms. Nykidra Nike Robinson, CEO and founder of Black Girls Vote, who will bring greetings on behalf of her organization. Following Ms. Robinson, I will introduce our moderator and we will begin our engaging conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels. It is such an honor to be with you all today, the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. And over this last year, Black Girls Vote has been really committed to expanding the work that we do, particularly around research. So we are honored that Dr. Daniels has joined our team. She's come on as a fellow with us. And over these last few months, she's helped us grow tremendously. So I would be remiss if I did not start off by thanking you, Dr. Daniels, just for your vision, your brilliance, and your commitment to Black women in politics as well as research. I also want to thank you all here for coming to Baltimore, though we are not together physically. We know Baltimore is the host city of the conference. Thank you, Madam President Tiffany Willoughby Harrod. Thank you for having us. I also want to thank the co-chairs of this committee, committee co-chairs Jasmine Yaris, as well as Tamerlane Tucker Ward. So thank you so much. Again, it's an honor to be with you all today. Excited to just kick back, put our feet up and just learn and talk. We are bridging community and academia. And as someone who started Black Girls Vote 6 years ago, it has truly been a whirlwind. If someone would have told me 7 years ago, I'd be speaking before the National Conference of Black Political Sciences, I was like, who, me? Oh, wow. So it's such an honor to be here with you all today and to learn from each other. And so excited to learn and experience and just grow together. So thank you so much. And I'll pass it on to the next speaker.
Okay. Thank you so much, Madam CEO. And now I will introduce our moderator, Dr. Pearl K. Dowe. Dr. Dowe is the Asa Griggs Candler Professor of Political Science and African American Studies at Emory University. Her recent scholarship focuses on African American women's political ambition and public leadership. Her manuscript, The Radical Imagination of Black Women, Ambition, Politics, and Power, is currently under contract with Oxford University Press. Her most recent publication, Resisting Marginalization, Black Women's Ambition and Agency, is published in 2020, received the Anna Julia Cooper Best Paper Award from the Association for the Study of Black Women in Politics. Dr. Dowe's published writing includes a co-authorship of Remaking the Democratic Party, Lyndon B. Johnson as a Native Son and Presidential Candidate. She has published numerous articles and book chapters that have appeared in the Journal of African American Studies, Political Psychology, Presidential Studies Quarterly, the Journal for Black Studies, and Social Science Quarterly. She is also the co-editor of the Review of Black Politics and is a member of the editorial boards of the Journal of Economics and Race and Policy and Race, Gender, and Class Journal. Please welcome me in joining Dr. Dowe this evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Ashley. You didn't have to read all that. I'll get you later, but thank you. So my job today is to moderate this amazing panel. So first, let me introduce our panel today. Excuse me, we have Ms. Krystal Leaphart, who is with Black Girls Vote. We have Dr. Andra Gillespie, my colleague at Emory University. Ashiah Parker, who is with No Boundaries Coalition, and Dr. Wendy Smooth at The Ohio State University. So let's begin our conversation for tonight. So we have a series of questions, but I definitely want us to have a dialogue instead of just a Q&A type of session. So definitely let's have this great conversation this evening. So just to begin, for our audience, I want you to try to familiarize them with your various perspectives and experiences. So can you briefly describe how you support Black women's involvement in politics as voters and or candidates based on your role as a community leader or researcher? So I see Dr. Smooth, you popped up first on my screen.
I was
You would
popped up
like to
first.
start?
I'll take it. I'll take it. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining for this exciting conversation. So excited to join in sisterhood with our sisters who are on the ground, on the front lines, doing the fight. And I love collecting data around the wonderful work that you are doing. As an NCOPE scholar, Black political scientist, it's hard for me to think about myself as a scholar or an activist. Coming up in the NCOPE's tradition, I've often thought of myself, or I'm poised to think about myself as both a scholar and an activist. So I've been doing work around Black women and women of color and girls in politics now, I can say, for 25 years. And have had an opportunity now to watch the field grow, both in terms of the numbers of activist groups that are on the ground. Professor Dowe, that you are doing such incredible work around, as well as to see the scholarship legitimized in our field of political science. When I started this work, there were just a couple of articles that I had to draw upon and a book chapter from the esteemed Dr. Jewel Prestige. And then I had to cull together all of the other ways that I could think about the role of Black women in politics. So it's a beautiful thing to see where the field has grown today. On the activist side, in just a few short days, I'm inviting a group of 50 Black women from across the state of Ohio to engage us in conversation about how we surface our Stacey Abrams, our LaTosha Brown in the state of Ohio. And I'm excited to do that work in coalition with a community group called the Ohio Unity Coalition, which is a part of the Black Women's Roundtable, and the John Glenn School of Public Affairs here that runs our Center for the American Woman in Politics Ready to Run program. So I don't see a difference between being an activist and a scholar. It's good work altogether.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Parker, see you next.
Yes. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Black Girls Votes, for the invitation. It's very an honor to be here with these lovely women. So for over 10 years in Baltimore, I have engaged in, I guess, two different phases of supporting Black women around politics. So on the community side, I have worked to register Black women and residents of Baltimore City in general for voting, done education, done forums, all kinds of things, and especially supporting young high school women to first register to vote and understand what they're voting for and why they're doing it and why it's so important. On the campaign side, I have supported quite a number of Black women who were running for office in Baltimore. And you'll hear today from me, I want the message to be that we need to support Black women. And when I say support, we need to give them money. So we can talk more about that. But I have financially given to campaigns, I've given time. So definitely we need to walk away with support, and sometimes support is our money. So thank you.
Okay, Dr. Gillespie.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this panel. It's truly an honor to be on this panel, not just with friends and colleagues from NCOPS, but also from practitioners who are in the field. And I think that this is actually a real testament to the possibilities of what can happen. And I think Black folks are on the leading edge of proving that we don't just have to stay in an ivory tower. We don't just have to be in the field, that there can be this dialogue and conversation across both groups. In my role as an academic and primarily as a researcher, I think it's important for me to ask relevant questions. It's very easy in political science to ask these abstract questions that only like two people care about. And you can sit and argue about it day after day, like, you know, get involved in obscure books or obscure math problems. And at the end of the day, right, the Ron Walters question kind of comes up for us. What does this have to do with the liberation of Black people? And I think one of the things that I take pride in as a Black political scientist, as a member of NCOPS, is the fact that we ask questions that other people actually care about and that have real world implications and applications. So when I think about sort of the work that we do, I may not always be out in the field, even though that's not, that I can be out in the field, but the work that I should be doing should be accessible so that practitioners can then take it, internalize it, and then use it. And one of the places where we have seen people use it is Black women who are doing field mobilization work. They are in conversation with researchers who are doing this kind of work. They are consumers of the work. They are informing their mobilization projects using the data that political scientists are collecting. And so because of that, like, this is a really, really important synergy that I don't think all of our colleagues, you know, in our departments, particularly if we're at PWIs, really know and are aware of. And I think it's something that we kind of have to champion, fight for, and advocate for. The other thing that I think is really important is, like, when I started in political science, you know, my dissertation was about Black voter mobilization, kind of generically speaking. It wasn't specifically focused on women. Then it kind of focused on African-American leadership. And I was writing about a lot of Black men because that's who was running for office at the time, particularly amongst Gen Xers. But then the first question comes from that is, well, where are women's voices in this? Where are women being represented? And I have to deal with that question and address it in order to tell a complete and full story about what's going on. So as time has gone on, right, the questions have become more explicit, and I find myself in greater dialogue with people who have always been doing work on Black women in politics. And then there are other questions that come up. So now that we are very much aware of the fact that there is a gender gap, for instance, within African-American communities that we often ignored, like we only paid attention to gender gaps in white communities, right? This is a question where I feel that I might be able to have some contribution and be able to add things. But most important, I would say, in my role as a public scholar, when I'm talking about my work to other people, it's important for me to highlight the work of Black women scholars. But in particular, when I'm talking about GOTV and voter mobilization, it's important for me to talk about the women who are doing this work in the field and to amplify those voices. So it'd be very, very easy for me to talk about Stacey Abrams, but it's important for me to talk about Stacey Abrams and all of the other unsung, unheralded women who are doing this work, some of whom have been doing this work a lot longer, and who are starting to sort of reap the benefits of that hard work of having tilled that soil for years and years and years. And if I can use my platform to be able to amplify those voices and show the work that's been going on for decades, then I see it as a responsibility and a pleasure and a joy to do that.
Thank you. Ms. Leaphart.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you again so much for the partnership and allowing me to be on such an amazing stage. I can talk briefly about just some of the experiences that I've had that have led me to do advocacy specifically around Black women in politics. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and was a member of the NAACP Youth Council. So if you're familiar with the NAACP Youth Council at all, in Detroit, we're the largest chapter, take it very seriously, do a lot of different voter mobilization, voter engagement things, engagement around issues and all that jazz. That interest early on led me to attend Howard University, where I continue to do work with the NAACP, but also focusing on a lot of social justice advocacy issues as well. A lot of my work when I was on campus really centered around Troy Davis things, if you all remember those things, Trayvon Martin things, if you also remember those things, and also the second election of President Obama. But it was also at Howard that a lot of friends and community were really into their Black feminist work and into Black feminist things, and always asked the question, where was the energy around the Black women and girls that were also slain by the police or were just dealing with things in a disproportionate way? So that question led me to the greatness that is radical Black feminism. From there, I volunteered with organizations like the YWCA, and my job ended up being with an organization called Nobel Women, which those that are not familiar is the national organization for Black elected legislative women. I actually just ended my tenure there, which is for an exciting reason to go into even more Black feminist issues. But since I moved to Baltimore right before the pandemic, I landed with an amazing organization called Black Girls Vote. So I've been working with them for a little while to just focus again on more advocacy issues as it relates to Black women, femmes, and girls. Again, happy to be here and happy to be in dialogue with all of you amazing folks. So I will pass the mic there.
Okay, thank you for that. What an amazing panel. It's so great to hear just the synergy and how we are applying our scholarship, and even how our practitioners are passionate about their work and incorporating all of what we are doing in support of Black women. So the next question is, let's talk a little bit about Black voters, as far as what it is that over the last few years, and particularly this last election cycle, that you saw or gleaned that was different or unexpected. Was there anything that was different? I mean, Black women are dynamic, but in this past election cycle, was there something that was just like, wow, I didn't expect that? Ms. Leaphart, since you ended us this last call, you can start off this time.
Sure. So I want to say the one thing that I think stood out for me that was new, again, for context, this is my, I think, third presidential election as far as full cycles go and things like that. So I'm coming from a very weird perspective of being in high school when President Obama was there, and the conversation has been on us for such a long time, at least for me. But I think there have been a lot more Black women on the ballots, which is something I think that's been unique. I know from the perspective of state and local politics, Nobel Women's membership increased from about 200 or so Black women across the country up until the 300s. And there hasn't been a leap like that in a very long time. So I think that's one thing that's a little specific and unique to the past couple of years. Also too, Black Girls Vote partnered with the National Conference on Citizenship to produce a report about Black women's civic engagement. So again, I think that the feeling of Black women being actively engaged more so than other communities, I think has always been something present, but to see that report and the data kind of being pushed to back it up in recent years has been interesting, especially for younger Black women. So in this report, which I'm happy to put in the chat, 71% of Black women that were polled have some sort of connection to news via politics or social media and things like that. And that's a nice chunk of people that are engaged in the process, that want to learn more about what's going on in their communities and are using their voices and their votes to also translate that into power. So I think that's kind of the main thing that stood out for me. Again, I'm coming from a very different perspective of we have always been the bomb. I haven't known anything else. We've always been the truth and the blueprint and the metric for success. But I will say there's been a big uptick in Black women that are also putting their names on the ballot as well.
Thank you. Andra?
The thing that I can't say that I'm surprised by anything that we've seen in the last few years. We've known that African-American women, for structural reasons, play an outsized role in determining sort of the overall course and shape of African-American politics. And so when we see that, 90% plus Democratic voting rate, we know that it's being driven disproportionately by Black women. And that's been the case for a long period of time. And we can thank people like Wendy for pointing us to the structural reasons for that. And so, like, you know, her article on Mess Worth Making is something that I assign to my students pretty regularly so that they can account for that and take advantage of it. I think people have really started to come to realize the importance of African-American women to Democratic Party politics in the last few election cycles. You know, we could look at Alabama and how Black women's sort of high turnout and almost unanimous support of Doug Jones got him elected to the Senate for that brief period of time. And I think the other reason why we see a greater emphasis and focus on African-American women, you know, is in part because Black women played a critical role in helping Joe Biden secure the Democratic nomination. And so Democrats realize that if you don't have Black women's vote, you don't have a base of support. So that's really important. But I think the other thing that Black women are doing is that they're advocating for themselves. And so you could make descriptive demands to have a seat at the table because it is the right thing to do. But then you could also use the leverage of your power and influence to make demands about why you absolutely deserve a seat at the table because you represent a powerful group of people. And so by virtue of your votes, and you can withhold those votes and actually cause trouble for people. So we have seen Black women assert themselves in terms of submitting themselves for candidacies, but then also making demands even behind the scenes to be in key advisory roles, or, you know, even pushing to, you know, be the vice presidential nominee and subsequent vice president of the United States. So this is a fertile period as a scholar to observe this and to then be able to write about it. But it's also important to see Black women coming into their own and making demands and actually seeing some of those demands being met and then trying to understand like when and why other demands aren't met.
I'm sorry.
I thought I was off mute. Wendy.
So my heart is just like thumping because I'm listening to Krystal say in her political lifetime, this is all she's ever known. And this is the dream we were all dreaming. And even those who come before us, you know, who were activists, who are still activists in the field, you know, always wanted a world in which Black women's activism was acknowledged, understood, and engaged. I can't say enough about Andra's point that this is the moment, right, in which Black women have organized claims to our democracy and the receipts, as they say, to cash in on the things that they've been advocating for so long. What's been really interesting to see, and Pearl, I know this is some things that comes out in your work, is to see the layers of organization that has happened over the time period that we might see a kind of heightened moment of Obama in 2008, and then we see the Doug Jones moment. The Doug Jones moment was big for Black women's organizations because they woke up and said, hey, wait a minute, we are actually making this mule move and it has incredible results. And if we're delivering these results, we need to collect on it. And I think what we're seeing in our current moment, and especially in the embodiment of the vice president, we're seeing, and the nomination of the Supreme Court justice, we're seeing a moment in which Black women are collecting on the things that they have invested in for quite some time over numerous election cycles. What I think we need to be very mindful of as scholars is how we are careful to tell the story. This is not a story of demographic shifts. This is not a story of the ways in which Democratic Party politics becomes generous. No, this is activism. This is organization. This is strategic, political, pragmatic politics deployed by Black women. And we have to write about that in such a way that our field and the broader community, because I think there's an interesting story for the broader community to appreciate in terms of seeing the magnificence of Black women's organizing.
Asia.
Yes, so I will piggyback on Krystal. I believe Black women have been the bomb forever. And I'm much older than Krystal, but I also believe that this is one of the first times in history that Black women have been, and I can't think of a better word, but legitimized in the media. We don't need to be legitimized by the white media or the white culture at all. But I think it's the first time that, going back to Obama, not so much Obama, but his wife, Michelle Obama, was one of the most educated first ladies that we've ever had in history, and had a career and could stand on her own right. Also, like we talked about, the vice president, I saw that Dr. Smooth had an AKA sign in her back. So that was one of the first time that we had Black sororities and fraternities kind of highlighted and was mobilized, because you couldn't tell an AKA that Kamala Harris was not going to get into the White House. So I think that this is one of the first times that we know we're great. We don't need the pump up or the extra, but I think it's the first time on the grand scheme of things in America that it was on like Front Street, CNN. Everyone had to acknowledge how brilliant Black women are, not just in politics, but just in contributions to American culture in general.
Okay, well, that's a great segue to where we're going now. Somebody said shout out to the Deltas. Yes, so
I knew Professor Dowe would take
you know I had to go there, Wendy. But there's a great point which segues to this next phase of questions around candidates, right? And particularly around the fact that from a scholarship standpoint, as Wendy and Andra both mentioned, this field has emerged from a few women, Black women, NCOPE founders, and early members, such as Jewel Perch, one of our founders, and Mamie Locke and May King writing about Black women. And then we have a lull, and then we have Wendy coming, who really understates her significance in this research. I mean, we really have built off of Wendy's dissertation and her work on Black women. And then Andra's work, Who's Black Politics, an amazing volume in which she had Katrina Gamble talk about where were Black women running, particularly Black women running for office, congressional office. And so we have these building blocks, and now we have a new field and younger scholars looking at Black women. At the same time, we have the emergence of these organizations these collectives coming together, such as Black Girl Run. We have Black Women's Roundtable, which they're beginning their program in a few days. Several of us have contributed to their report. So again, another example of public scholarship. And then the organizations that we all are affiliated with. So looking at Black women's candidates from these different perspectives, can we now talk about, we talked about the successes in that we've seen these women win, but in this moment where we have increased racial hostility, we are in this very, this moment of anxiety, not just with COVID, we have international issues. We have all these issues going on, the attacks against CRT, public education. Where are Black women as candidates right now? How can Black women move forward on these successes in this climate, which looks very different than what it looked like 2 years ago? In some ways similar, but very different. It's much more stark, I think. So where do we see Black women and the challenges that they face? And then where are the opportunities for future success? So with that, let's start with Asia. Let's go ahead and start with you since you wrapped us up this last go round. You see that I have a little pattern here.
Yeah. So Black women are still in a place where it's difficult to run and win in some cases. So in Baltimore, we've had a lot of success where the top 3 or 4 positions that are citywide were once held by Black women. But with that being said, those Black women will also tell you, I mentioned it before, and I'm going to mention it through this whole thing, that fundraising is really hard. And part of that is still misogyny. Part of that is still majority of the corporations and businesses and wealthy donors are white, and they don't trust or believe in the capabilities of Black women. There's a lot of different reasons for why it's still difficult. One of your questions is, where do we go from here? That I don't know. And that I'm still on the ground and I'm willing to work, because when you look at a Stacey Abrams, someone who really should have won her race, and all of the work that she's done, even afterwards, she delivered Joe Biden. I'm sorry. She delivered Georgia, and she did so much work underground over the time from her run up to the presidential run that a lot of people still, if they're not engaged, they don't understand the gravity of what Stacey Abrams was able to do. But with that, let's see what happens moving forward when she goes to run again. I think that the structure and the forces are still trying to hold down Black women from being successful. But I'll switch a little and say that, especially locally, what we can do is, again, educate the electorate on why it's important to support those who look like us, right? Black women are running households. Black women are running churches. Black women are leaders in our community. So why wouldn't they be our politicians? Why wouldn't they be the people who are leading us in the State House and in City Hall? So we have to educate and definitely build support from ground up, from the grassroots, for Black people, Black women in particular, that are running. And I say it all the time, it has to be a cultural shift. And I hope I'm not offending anyone. I know I can speak for my family. We were not rich, and a lot of times we did not have a lot of extra money, or we didn't think that we did. So donating to charities and donating to political campaigns were just like, out of the realm. We were not socialized to donate and give money in that way. But I think that now we have to teach residents, teach our children that if it's nothing but $5 a month, we have to do it, because that's the game that's being played. There's millions of dollars that are at stake, even in local races. So in order to get the people who we know are qualified and that we love and know into office, we're going to have to start supporting them financially, and also invest in time and commitment to campaigns.
I'm glad you mentioned that was going to be one of my follow-up questions, but I see Andra is getting ready to jump in. But Andra, in your answer, can you, because I know what your research is on, can you also talk about the dynamic of turnout, and how the low turnout, particularly in the primaries, how that impacts Black women as well?
Sure. Wow. So, okay, I'll figure out how to incorporate both of these in. It's important, I think, for us to think about Black women candidates and ambition from an intersectional framework. So we know women in general are disadvantaged, right? But being a Black woman is going to make it harder, because there are just certain types of structural factors that are going to compound more. So like, we know women in general get asked to run for office less, right? And so when you don't get asked to run for office, you don't conceive of yourself as a legislator or as an elected executive, right? So you got to sort of like inspire people's imagination by like telling them that you could possibly do this one day, and give that type of encouragement that lots of white men in particular get and often take for granted. And Black men might actually be in a position where they may be getting those types of signals before Black women get them. And when we could talk about, even think about that in a family, like especially if you had a particular political family where they have resources, if the son is being groomed for office, but the daughter isn't groomed for office, like you would think that they're all getting the same signals, but no, because we tend to raise children differently. And we have different gender norms. So we have to kind of break that stuff down and be intentional about telling Black women, hey, you can do this, you should do this. And there are actually certain advantages that Black women have in terms of being able to address the issues that people are talking about today, right? So like, there's an intersectional advantage that Black women may have relative to Black women to be able to sort of use their position as mothers to be able to talk about critical race theory and schooling, and do that with an authority that sometimes Black men don't necessarily have. So I think Nadia's work amplifies that and kind of shows how Black women legislators in Maryland really took advantage of that to kind of, make some of the arguments a little bit more palatable. So I think we can talk about that. And I think this is why groups like Higher Heights exist, so that they could do that job that maybe the White House Project isn't going to get to, like as many women of color. So you create these Indigenous Black organizations that are going to do that job of doing the stuff that we know from the women in politics literature on career and political ambition is able to do. The other thing is that, and I see the organizations like Black Girls Vote and the New Georgia Project taking advantage of the literature, right? When people are low propensity voters, we can increase their likelihood of turning out to vote by giving them simple personal reminders. So, like this, this is old hat Gerber and Green 2000 type of work, right? You just got to do it. It's hard work. It's labor intensive, but it's actually pretty easy to do, and anybody can do this. And so because people have sometimes been socialized into thinking elections are, every leap year in November, like they forget the dog catcher race is probably going to be in March and T-Splost is going to be in April, or they're going to be primaries in off years. These mobilization organizations exist and work year round to remind people of these elections. And the more we remind, the more people we touch, the more we can increase a person's likelihood of showing up to vote, and we can increase their likelihood of showing up in subsequent elections. So I think probably the lesson for the parties is to make sure that they reach out to voters and just don't do it in even number years for their November elections, and to support these grassroots organizations that are actually in the trenches in the field doing this work all the time. And I think the final thing that I would say about this is to remember to take a long view of the strategy. People saw Stacey Abrams emerge in 2018, right? But the New Georgia Project starts in 2013. So it took 5 years for her to get to the point where she could make a credible run for governor. And then 7 years in order to be able to get Democrats winning statewide office in the state of Georgia. And Helen Butler had been doing this stuff for decades before that. So I think sometimes people can get really frustrated and discouraged if they invest a lot of time intensely for a short period of time and they don't see immediate results. And I think we just have to sort of remind people that, yeah, that's frustrating and that's discouraging, but take heart. If you keep on doing this, you might not get everything, but you will get something, and to just kind of keep on pressing in and being faithful to that.
Krystal.
Yes, I'm going to try to stick with my notes because I have so much to say on this from working with Black women legislators firsthand. But I would definitely want to lift the fundraising point and just dig a little bit more into that. Unfortunately, I think sometimes when people see these quote unquote magical Black women running and winning and all these good things, people forget sometimes that they're still Black women at the end of the day, and they still have to deal with all of the societal issues and pressures and things like that at the same time. So generally speaking, again, there may not be formal numbers, but we know what we know. Black women are not asking for the same kinds of money as other people. Black women sometimes don't have the same access to networks and the coalitions and collectives to pull in that money. And again, we're seeing Higher Heights and Collective PAC and all these groups that are raising money and working with folks to, elect a certain kind of candidate that just have been overlooked forever, but those things are still very true. Also, quite frankly, we don't trust Black women with money overall. We don't trust Black women with large amounts of money, especially, which is so strange to me because there's so many stories of, grandpa worked and gave the money to grandma and she paid the bills and she made sure everything worked the way it was supposed to work, right? So there's this double kind of piece there where it's we know Black women run the homes and are efficient and are able to handle business there, but sometimes we just don't see them as viable candidates. I think, again, that's changing with the large amount of people that are being elected and the different kind of visibility that's on Black women in politics right now. But I do think that point sometimes is missed. I think a lot of Black women that are winning making lemons out of lemonade. But I think one thing that I think would be really, if nothing else comes out of this moment, is really how do we apply an abundance model to how Black women run for office, and how do we also increase the protections for Black women that are in office as well. So that's my second point, in the sense of we push for Black women to run. Again, a lot of them have been successful, especially recently. Again, we're seeing all types of numbers doubling and tripling in state legislatures and things across the country. But I think I'm mostly concerned with what do we do or how can we protect them once they get there? We saw a lot of examples of situations where Black women are entering legislative buildings and they don't look like a legislator. So it's a problem, particularly with Amelia Sykes out of Ohio, which I see Dr. Smooth is nodding her head. So I'm sure you know about that one, but even Representative Park Cannon out of Georgia being arrested recently for knocking on the governor's door around voting rights. And a familiar story with now Congresswoman Nikema Williams, who also had a similar piece with being arrested at a rally around voting rights as well. So it's like, okay, we're getting these people elected and pushing for that, but that can also be a deterrent when you're seeing the way Black women are treated in public office as well. We had a member out of Vermont actually that decided not to run again simply because of the treatment. So again, like these are very clear examples of the issues, and we're still talking in circles around what Black women have to deal with in general, let alone while elected. So I think those are things that we really need to look into and take seriously. I will end on a little bit of a positive note, if you will. I think the piece around having an intersectional analysis to how Black women do policy just makes them much better legislators and much better elected officials and leaders for our communities in general. You're seeing Attica Scott, who's also running for Congress right now, a legislator out of Kentucky, who pushed Breonna's law and really was on the streets with the community fighting for Breonna Taylor and all the situations like that. Also, too, we have Speaker Jones, who is easily one of the most powerful Black women legislators in the country, who is pushing reproductive rights things and all these Black agenda specific things. And again, they just are more effective. I think, unfortunately, the push and pull to get there, once you're in there and you know what you want to focus on and what you want to do and how you want to do it, they get it done, right? Black women push the ERA protections all across the country and really put it over that threshold that's needed for that to be an even larger conversation than what it's been in the last couple of decades. And they're really just killing it. So again, I think the perspective that Black women bring can make the difficulties worth it. But I just want to make sure that it's a full spectrum of there's still a lot of deficit in what we have to deal with. There's still a lot of lack in what they're dealing with. And again, making lemonade from lemons, like cool, because again, that's what we've always had to do. But again, I think in us demanding and asking for what we need to be demanding and asking for, that would be a big thing for me. Lastly, I want to share a report that Nobel Women and State Innovation Exchange produced around Black women, particularly on a state level. And I think, oh, thank you, Krystal A put it in there from Black Girls Vote. Shout out to Krystal A. But what that report essentially, again, paints the picture for us is we know that we're underrepresented in pretty much every state. Even in states where we have a large population, the state legislatures are still super underrepresented. And what that means is they're looking at 100,000 policies per year, right? That perspective is missing. And that's something that is essential to getting the money to our communities that we need, getting the things done that we need for our families and our children and ourselves. So, representation is important, and it's more than just, the symbolism of it, which I think symbols can be important sometimes, but really what is the acts, I think, going forward for organizations like ours and the ones listed in the question to make sure that Black women are taken care of as they're elected as well.
Can I jump in there? I know.
Yeah, Wendy, you're next.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So many pieces. I'm like trying to stay seated in my seat. One thing we want to think about for our younger scholars who are in the process of thinking about dissertation ideas. We have a literature emerging around violence against women in politics and really thinking about it from an international perspective. But one of the things that we need to pay attention to as scholars who study the intersections is really thinking about racialized and gendered violence against women in politics, because it shows up differently. And we need to be in the process of understanding the patterns and trends that emerge. And that is a really great way that we build the literature of great friend scholars like Mona Lena Crook, who does this work, but does it from an international perspective and misses this kind of racialized, gendered perspective in the US. So shout out to a dissertation topic in the making. And then you say you got it at NCOPS, and that's a good thing. The other thing I think we got to deal with that we haven't really talked about, because I think we're like leapfrogging, right? We still have a challenge around making the case for why politics and formal politics is important for Black women, right? Important for Black people, because we still have people who will tell us when we're out there knocking on doors, the system is broken, it's not gonna work, it's never gonna work for our people. It's never going to be the answer. There's no way you can change a broken system, and all of the various points of rhetoric that we hear. And there is, and we have to acknowledge, there's some sound footing around that conversation, given the ways in which Black people have been systemically violated, right? Or whether we're talking about housing, whether we're talking about voting, whether we're talking about healthcare. Those are real and critical issues that we have to take hold of. The other thing that I think a part of this, and I think young, and especially in terms of thinking about our younger voters and younger activists, is how we hold conversation and space for the ways in which politics does not equal protest or politics. That protest is a legitimate form of political activism, and one cannot operate, as our scholars, Catherine Tate and our scholars, Adolph Reed Jr. have talked and written about for years, that one cannot operate without the other. But we do need bridges, the Cori Bush example, right? To build bridges between an activist stance coming off the streets of Ferguson and into the halls of Congress, and being able to speak with authenticity to issues around housing and evictions and the ways in which people were being mistreated during the pandemic. That's a particular Black women's perspective, but a Black women's perspective that was fashioned out of activism. So we've got to figure out, and I don't think we're doing an adequate job around translating the ways in which protest politics is important for informing the ways in which we engage in formal electoral politics.
Thank you, Wendy. And that's a great segue. We are running out of time, but because we do want to get in a few questions, but I do have one closing question. And Wendy really gives a nice segue into it. It's a two-part question. So thinking about where we are as scholars and practitioners, how can we best merge, and you somewhat answered the question, Wendy, best merge what we do to advance Black women. But then also, in light of the theme of our conference, what is your wish for Black women in American democracy? And so Wendy, I'm gonna let you pick up, and then everybody can jump in, but Wendy, you can pick up from there. Andra, do you need to run?
I've got 5 minutes.
Okay, Andra, you wanna start?
Sure. You know, what I think I want for Black women is for Black women to get their due. And I want, I'm going to sort of channel Nadia. We co-wrote this article in Phylon a couple of years ago, where it's like, Black women do this for themselves. They're not doing it for everybody else. But if we are going to do this work, then we need to be recognized for it. And we need to be given power commensurate with the effort that's happening. And so, you know, the project will be advanced when Black women are taken seriously, and not just because, you know, they threaten to walk out of the DNC or something else along those lines. Like, it just needs to be taken seriously as a matter of course, because we paid our dues and we deserve to be at the table. We shouldn't have to fight for it every time. You know, I think a sort of like the parting words are, I love the partnership. I hope that it continues between scholars and activists and scholar activists, so that we're always in constant communication with each other. And I think probably my greatest wish is, in this moment where it's still really intense, is that we find ways to support each other, because this is a marathon, it's a long game, and we're all gonna get tired, and we just need to sort of make sure that we're all supporting each other to make sure that the work continues and that we are all able to take care of ourselves.
Thank you. Asia?
All right, so how do we bridge between scholarship and work that's being done on the grassroots? That's huge, especially in a place like Baltimore, especially in a place like West Baltimore where I serve, because sometimes we're both, you know, it could be whoever, a community leader, someone from academia, and then there's a regular community member, and we're all Black women, but we don't see ourselves in each other. So there's definitely a longer, deeper practical conversation that needs to happen to actually bridge that gap that I just don't have the answer for today. I do know that what we can do to keep Black women at the table, to bring Black women to the table is basically supporting each other, giving each other, you know, the confidence that we belong there and that the table's illegitimate if we're not there. If we're not at the table, it's just not a thing. And I think that's the first thing we can do. And then just being real, those of us who are doing the work, supporting each other as well. Sometimes you know how it is when you're in groups and you're doing work. It's like, why is she doing this? And how she get to do that? I don't know why she's doing it. And I don't know how she got to doing it, but she's doing a great job. So let's support her, let's encourage her, and let's continue to have her uplifted in a public light. So those are, you know, my comments and how I close this segment. I'm just so thankful again to be here.
Thank you. Wendy?
Thank you. So, you know, my long-term wish, I'm gonna play off of Andra's long-term and long game politics. That's always a good reminder. I am so encouraged by the work of Black Girls Vote, because they're focused on our girls, right? I have an 8-year-old daughter, and we talk about voting. We talk about who's running for office. We, you know, stood in front of the television and watched the swearing in of the first African-American woman vice president and South Asian vice president. And those are important moments because she understands the world, she has a worldview that Black women are at the table. And I want to maintain that, right? That's an important component of the long game, is how we are doing political socialization. And I'm throwing out all kinds of dissertation topics because here goes another one, right? We need to figure out, or we need to address in the literature, this notion that low-income households are not talking about politics. I did a research project around girls of color in leadership with Dr. Elaine Richardson here at The Ohio State University. And Dr. Richardson and I talked to young girls about their political aspirations and whether or not they could see themselves in the political moment. These girls were of very socioeconomic demographics, but they had all kinds of ideas and discussions, and it was clear in their families' households and at their dinner tables or in the car or on the bus or walking, their families are talking about politics. We don't talk about politics perhaps in the same ways that some other communities might talk about it, but when we say that so-and-so got jacked the F up and we need to do something about that, that's talking political. And we need to figure out how we then help girls to make the connection between understanding that it was jacked up about what happened in their community and then what they can do about it. And that my long range vision is that we think about the research from that perspective as well, that we speak differently about politics and it is political, and our girls are ready to take on the next frontier of what politics has to offer and the work that has to be done ahead.
And Krystal, you can wrap us up.
Oh, what a treat, what a treat. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. Quite honestly, I think that sometimes the community-based, civic-based organizations, the academia piece, and then the electeds just feel very siloed sometimes. But I think every so now you get folks that are kind of dipped in all of them, i.e. like myself, who just can't seem to slow down because I love talking about all things Black women. But I think that as opportunities like this present themselves, we need to really be, I think, ready and in place to be able to just complement each other the best ways that we know how. And again, I think on a massive scale, it may not have happened or it may not be as visible, but I think it does happen. Dr. Brown is actually working with Black Girls Vote to do research around Black women in civics. And she also connected with me when I was at Nobel Women about talking to elected officials. So I think it's happening. It just may not be as publicized, but I think there's also always room for opportunity and growth to engage in that work more often. Two, quite frankly, a lot of our civic-based groups really need serious investment in memberships, and access to information, and really having those connections to people that do the research that you all do, but also have the youth that can come to the table, have the students in college that can join the collegiates, have the adults that may want to do outreach around voter registration, and just also have the experiences that bring all of what we need to the table to be able to demand the things that we need to demand. With that, I'll put a link to BGV's website and membership information so you all can stay in touch with us that way as well, which I think is another good step. But I think overall, I think like someone said earlier, Black women and girls are the key to the operation. We're not a demographic you can talk to 2 weeks before. We're not a demographic that's going to work magic and miracles on behalf of everybody else before ourselves. And if we are doing that, that's going to change. So I think there's really a place and space and opportunity for us to really use the academia and the research that you all are doing to frame how we go about political agendas and the issues that Black women are facing, and talking about Black girlhood and how that needs to be reimagined so that more Black women may see themselves as leaders and not just mules to communities. So I think it's kind of like a overall kind of mixing, if you will, like a, not the, what do they call it? Like a salad analogy of like everybody kind of doing their own thing, but really flowing together in the way that makes sense. So that would be my piece. And, I think that, again, conversations like this ongoing, figuring out ways that we can complement the work that you all are doing and vice versa is really the only way we're going to be able to break some of those silos and make sure that people get what they need from our communities.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been an amazing conversation. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone, and particularly something, Wendy kept saying, dissertation topics, and to our younger scholars, our new scholars. One of the things I will say to you is that if you ever get discouraged and you think nobody's going to read this is an example of why we do what we do. That our work is it is important. It does go outside of the community. And our practitioners welcome our support of their work. And so there's great opportunities for collaboration. So don't ever get discouraged and think no one cares about that dissertation or what you're thinking about. And so thank you to this great panel. Also, thank you to our president, Tiffany Willoughby-Hurrah, who has been our scribe. If you've been noticing the chat, she has been, well, we're not tweeting, but she may be live tweeting, but she's giving us our references and key quotes. So thank you. I didn't see any questions, but I think I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Daniels. I think this is the first public forum I get to say Dr. Daniels. And she's going to wrap us up for the evening. So thank you. Thank you for allowing me to engage with these wonderful women tonight.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Dowe. And I just want to thank every single one of the panelists that were featured this evening. This was definitely a labor of love. And I, appreciate the love that you have for talking about Black women in politics, and also me that you agreed. So yes, I'm just so happy that, we were able to talk and discuss. Now, before we leave, I did want to lend the floor over to Dr. Willoughby-Hurrah if she had any comments to close us out.
No, I am floored by how amazing my sistren are. I'm absolutely floored. And I'm sure there's something more eloquent than that you want to close us with, but I am blessed to be a Black woman, truly. Thank you all for the reminder of how important we are in the world. Thank you.
Okay, and Dr. Yarish or Dr. Tucker-Wargs, do you have any words that you wanted to say?
I just want to thank everybody for working with the local arrangements committee to make this possible. It was so beautiful to have you all here. And I wanted to also encourage everybody to subscribe to the YouTube channel for the NCOPE's YouTube channel. If you need more information on that, you can find it in our booth, because I'm sure this recording is something that people will want to go back to, especially with all of those drops for all of those dissertation ideas. So thank you so much. And I look forward to the rest of the conversations.
Okay, Dr. Tucker-Warricks, did you have anything?
Oh, Jasmine speaks for me. Just wonderful. Just appreciate. I'm just so glad everything worked out. It's just so beautiful. I'm just looking at y'all and just looking, even without listening. It's just so wonderful. So thank you, thank you.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much. We hope that you all have a wonderful rest of the evening, and we hope that this is not, the last conversation that we have. We just hope that this is the first of many. So again, wishing you all good health and safety, and good night.